5 ways to get God to move on your case. Have you ever felt like God wasn't moving fast enough? You've been praying for months, maybe years. You've been faithful, you've been patient, you've done everything you know to do, but heaven seems silent and your situation hasn't changed. What if I told you that there are specific actions that trigger God's intervention in your life? Not manipulation, because you can't manipulate God, but biblical principles that position you for breakthrough. Today, I'm going to share 5 ways to get God to move on your case. And the 5th one? It's so powerful that when you activate it, you'll see breakthrough in areas where you've seen nothing but closed doors for years. Before we begin, I need you to do something. Drop in the comments right now, what's the one situation you need God to move on today? I want to pray over every single comment. Let me tell you about a woman named Sarah. Not the Sarah from the Bible, but a modern-day woman whose story will shake you. Way number 1, desperate prayer. Sarah had been believing God for a miracle for 3 years. Her marriage was crumbling. Her husband had become a stranger, distant, cold, refusing counseling, talking about divorce. She'd prayed gentle prayers. God, please fix my marriage. Please change his heart. But nothing changed. One night, after another argument ended with her husband sleeping in the guest room, Sarah didn't just pray, she wept. She got on her face before God, literally face down on her bedroom floor, and she cried out from the depths of her soul. God, I can't do this anymore. I don't have any more strength. I don't have any more answers. If you don't move, this is over. I need you. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polite, it wasn't the kind of prayer you'd pray in church. It was raw, it was messy, it was desperate. And everything changed. Here's what Sarah discovered. Polite prayers don't move heaven. Desperate prayers do. Think about the woman with the issue of blood in Mark chapter 5. She'd been bleeding for 12 years. She'd spent all her money on doctors. She was ritually unclean, socially isolated, physically dying. The Bible says she'd suffered much under many physicians. But when she heard Jesus was passing by, she didn't send a polite request. She fought through the crowd. She broke religious law by touching people while unclean. She pushed past the disciples. She was desperate enough to risk public humiliation, religious condemnation, everything just for a chance to touch the hem of his garment. And Jesus stopped. In the middle of a crowd of thousands, he felt her touch. Why? Because desperation has power that casual faith doesn't. Sarah's desperate prayer that night wasn't the end. It was the beginning. She prayed like that every night for 2 weeks, crying out, wrestling with God, refusing to let go until she had an answer. On the 14th night, her husband walked into their bedroom while she was praying. He'd heard her through the door night after night, and for the first time in months, he saw her, really saw her. He broke down. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I've been so angry. I don't want to lose you. That conversation led to counseling. That counseling led to healing. That healing led to a marriage stronger than it had ever been. Was it the desperate prayer alone? No, but it was the catalyst. You see, when you pray casually, you're asking God to fit into your schedule. When you pray desperately, you're acknowledging that without Him, you have nothing, and God responds to that level of dependence. Let me ask you, when was the last time you prayed a desperate prayer? Not a comfortable one, but one where you truly poured out your heart. Drop desperate in the comments if you're ready to pray differently. Hannah did it in 1 Samuel. She prayed so desperately for a child that the priest thought she was drunk. But that desperate prayer moved God to open her womb and give her Samuel, one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. The Syrophoenician woman did it in Matthew 15. She begged Jesus for her daughter's healing. When he initially didn't respond, she didn't walk away offended. She got more desperate. She worshiped him. She persisted. And Jesus said, "Woman, your faith is great. Let it be done as you wish." Desperation isn't doubt. Desperation is faith on fire. But Sarah learned something else in her journey. Desperate prayer opened the door, but the second way is what kept it open. Way number 2, radical obedience. 3 months after her marriage started healing, Sarah felt God speaking to her during her morning prayer, not audibly, but clearly in her spirit. "Forgive your mother." Her stomach dropped. Sarah and her mother hadn't spoken in 5 years. The wounds ran deep. Years of manipulation, criticism, emotional abuse. Sarah had every right to keep that door closed. She'd processed it in therapy. She'd moved on. She was fine. But God's instruction was clear. Forgive her. Reach out to her. Everything in Sarah screamed no. This wasn't fair. Her mother hadn't apologized. Her mother hadn't changed. Why should she be the one to extend the olive branch? For 2 weeks, Sarah wrestled with it. She argued with God. "I've forgiven her in my heart. Isn't that enough? Do I really have to contact her?" But the conviction wouldn't leave. Here's the second way to get God to move on your case. Radical obedience to what He's asking, even when it makes no sense. Think about Naaman, the Syrian commander in 2 Kings chapter 5. He had leprosy. He traveled all the way to Israel to see the prophet Elisha for healing. He expected a dramatic miracle, hands laid on him, prayers spoken over him, something impressive. Instead, Elisha didn't even come out to meet him. He sent a messenger with instructions, "Go wash in the Jordan River 7 times." Naaman was furious. The Jordan River was muddy and disgusting. Syria had better rivers. This was insulting. He almost left without his healing because the instructions seemed too simple, too humiliating, too beneath him. But his servants convinced him, "If the prophet had asked you to do something great, wouldn't you have done it? Why not do this simple thing?" So Naaman obeyed. He humbled himself. He went to the dirty Jordan River, and by the 7th dip, his skin was completely healed, like the skin of a young child. The miracle wasn't in the water. The miracle was in the obedience. Sarah finally picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking. She called her mother for the first time in 5 years. "Mom, it's me. I've been thinking about you. I want to talk. Can we have coffee?" Her mother was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a voice Sarah had never heard before, broken, vulnerable, her mother whispered, "I thought you'd never call. I've been waiting. I'm so sorry, Sarah, for everything." That coffee meeting turned into tears, into confessions, into the beginning of a relationship Sarah thought was dead forever. But here's what floored Sarah. The very next week, something she'd been praying about for over a year suddenly broke open. A job opportunity she thought she'd lost called her back. The position was hers.
Coincidence? Sarah didn't think so. She learned something profound. God often won't move on what you're asking Him for until you move on what He's asking you for. Abraham experienced this. God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, the very son through whom God's promise was supposed to be fulfilled. It made no sense. It contradicted everything God had said. But Abraham obeyed. He raised the knife, and at that moment of radical obedience, God provided the ram and confirmed His covenant. Question for you. What has God been asking you to do that you've been avoiding? Type obey if you know exactly what it is. Sometimes it's forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. Sometimes it's giving when your bank account says you can't afford it. Sometimes it's letting go of something you're holding too tightly. Sometimes it's speaking up when it's easier to stay silent. Radical obedience is uncomfortable. It's illogical. It doesn't always make sense in the moment, but it positions you for miracles. Sarah was seeing God move. Her marriage was restored. Her relationship with her mother was healing. Her career was advancing. She was experiencing breakthrough after breakthrough. But then she hit a wall, a situation that desperate prayer and obedience didn't seem to touch. And that's when she discovered the third way. Way number 3, strategic fasting. Sarah's younger brother had walked away from God years ago. Drugs, bad relationships, destructive choices. She'd prayed for him. She'd obeyed God and how she treated him, but nothing changed. If anything, he seemed to be getting worse. One Sunday, her pastor preached on fasting, not as a diet, not as a ritual, but as a spiritual weapon.
Sarah had fasted before, skipped a meal here or there, but never with intentionality. That week, she felt God leading her to a 3-day fast, specifically for her brother's salvation. 3 days of no food, just water, just prayer, just seeking God's face for her brother's life. The first day was hard. By the second day, she was physically weak but spiritually sharp. By the third day, something shifted in the spiritual realm that she couldn't explain. On the evening of her third day, her brother called her. He was crying, something she hadn't seen since they were kids. "Sarah, I can't keep living like this. I don't know what happened, but something broke inside me today. I need help. I need God. Can you help me find a church, a program, anything?" Sarah sat there, phone in hand, tears streaming down her face. She knew God had moved. Here's why fasting is so powerful. It's the physical demonstration of spiritual hunger. When you fast, you're saying to God, "I want you more than I want the thing that sustains my physical body. My need for breakthrough is greater than my need for comfort." Jesus himself fasted 40 days before beginning his ministry, and when his disciples couldn't cast out a demon, he told them, "This kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." There are some chains that prayer alone won't break. There are some strongholds that obedience alone won't demolish. But when you add fasting to your prayer and obedience, you're stepping into a different dimension of spiritual warfare. Daniel fasted for 21 days, seeking understanding from God. On the 21st day, an angel appeared and said, "From the first day you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days." Did you catch that? The answer was released on day 1, but there was warfare in the heavenly realm that took 21 days to break through. Daniel's fasting sustained the battle until victory came. Let me be clear, fasting isn't about twisting God's arm. It's about aligning your spirit with His will. It's about breaking the power of the flesh so the power of the Spirit can flow unhindered. Have you ever fasted for breakthrough? Drop fasting in the comments and let's encourage each other. Sarah's brother entered rehab that week. 6 months later, he gave his life to Christ. Today, he's 2 years sober and serving in ministry. Sarah had discovered 3 powerful ways to move God's hand: desperate prayer, radical obedience, and strategic fasting. But she was about to learn that there's a 4th way that many Christians completely overlook. Way number 4, bold declaration. A year into her journey, Sarah faced a new crisis. The doctors found a mass. They ran tests. The word cancer was mentioned. She was scheduled for a biopsy in 2 weeks. Fear tried to consume her. Worst-case scenarios played in her mind on repeat. She prayed. She fasted. She obeyed everything she knew to do, but she still felt paralyzed by fear. Then one morning during her prayer time, she read Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Something clicked. She'd been praying, but her words outside of prayer were filled with fear. What if it's cancer? What if it's stage 4? What am I going to do? She realized she was speaking death over her situation instead of life. That day, she changed her language. She stopped speaking the fear and started speaking the promise. "By His stripes I am healed. No weapon formed against me will prosper. I will live and not die and declare the works of the Lord." She spoke it in the morning. She spoke it throughout the day. She spoke it when the fear came knocking. She spoke it when she didn't feel it. She spoke it when doubt screamed louder. She declared God's word over her body, her situation, her future. This is the 4th way to get God to move on your case. Bold declaration of His word over your circumstances. God created the entire universe with words. Let there be light, and there was light. Words have creative power. When the children of Israel stood at the edge of the promised land, 10 spies came back with a bad report. "There are giants in the land. We're like grasshoppers compared to them. We can't take the land." But Joshua and Caleb spoke differently. "We are well able to overcome it. The Lord is with us. Do not fear." Same land, same giants, different words, different outcome. The 10 spies spoke defeat, and that entire generation died in the wilderness. Joshua and Caleb spoke faith, and they were the only ones from their generation who entered the promised land. Your words don't just describe your reality, they create it. Sarah went to her biopsy appointment still speaking life. I am healed. God is faithful. This will not take me out. The doctor came back with the results. Benign, not cancerous, just a fibrous mass that they'd monitor but wouldn't require treatment. Sarah broke down in the doctor's office, not just because of the good news, but because she realized the power she'd been carrying in her mouth all along. Here's the question. What have you been declaring over your situation? Have you been speaking the problem or speaking the promise? Type life if you're ready to change your words. Job said, "You will decree a thing, and it will be established for you." Not hope for a thing, not wish for a thing. Decree it. Speak it with authority. But bold declaration without the fifth way is incomplete, and this fifth way, it's the secret that unlocks everything else. Way number 5, extravagant worship. Sarah's story was filled with victories now. Marriage restored, family reconciled, health protected, career blessed. She had so much to be thankful for, but there was one thing she'd been praying for that still hadn't happened: a baby. She and her husband had been trying for years. Doctors said there was no medical reason why she couldn't conceive, but month after month, the pregnancy test came back negative. She'd prayed desperately, she'd obeyed, she'd fasted, she'd declared God's promises, but this one thing remained untouched. Then she read the story of King Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. 3 armies were coming to destroy Judah. Jehoshaphat was outnumbered, outmatched, with no military strategy that could save them. He called a fast, he prayed, he sought God, and God gave him the strangest battle strategy: send the worshipers out first. Not the warriors, not the weapons, the worshipers. So Jehoshaphat sent the choir to the front lines. They marched out singing, "Give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever." And as they worshipped, God set ambushes against their enemies. The 3 armies turned on each other and destroyed themselves. Judah didn't have to fight, they just had to worship. Sarah realized what she'd been missing. She'd been fighting for this baby, but she hadn't been worshiping through it. That night, she did something radical. Instead of crying through another negative pregnancy test, she turned on worship music and lifted her hands. She thanked God for what he'd already done. She praised him for who he was. She worshiped him not because she had the breakthrough, but because he was worthy of worship regardless. Night after night she worshipped, in the waiting, in the disappointment, in the silence, and something supernatural happened. Her faith stopped being about what she could get from God and became about who God was. 3 months later, she took another pregnancy test, positive. 9 months after that, she held her daughter in her arms, a miracle wrapped in flesh. Here's the 5th and most powerful way to get God to move on your case: extravagant worship, especially when you don't have a reason to worship except for who he is. Paul and Silas were beaten, bloodied, and thrown in prison with their feet in stocks. At midnight, the darkest hour, they didn't complain, they didn't murmur, they worshipped, and their worship shook the prison. The chains fell off, the doors flew open, not just for them, but for every prisoner. Worship doesn't just change your circumstance, worship changes the atmosphere. Final question. What would happen if you started worshiping God right now for what he's going to do, instead of complaining about what he hasn't done? Drop worship in the comments. When you worship in the waiting,